Washington's pushing for some big-time recruits.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hansen. He's site editor with Athlon Sports is Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all the everydayers today, but a quick reminder, wherever you're getting this podcast, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple News, Games on Music, anything like that, make sure you click that subscribe button because we're going to be changing up our schedule a little bit with spring practice on the horizon. You are officially about 24 hours away if you're with us listening to it on this Monday, because there's going to be so much fun this spring. We want to make sure we're bringing you all the best updates. So click that subscribe button so you never miss a new episode. Click the little bell too, so it notifies you whenever we post something. Lars, we're talking about some men's basketball transfer portal updates from Dominique Diomande to Nick Davidson. A whole lot to get to there. We're going to talk about the latest on some official visitors like Landen Miree, who you got a chance to talk to, and Luc Weaver, who I'm a big fan of after watching his film again. And we're going to get there in a minute because Lars, Bott Mulitalo, Brian Bonner, top 100 prospects that Washington might be in the lead for.
Interesting. Well, they're both unique cases because Bott is in his own right now a unique case going as an offensive tackle. Like, how do we had that conversation already. We can continue to have that. But the one for me is Brian Bonner because we've been knowing that Washington was going to take a second running back in this 2026 class. And we already know, like, you already have Noe who's locked in. Like, you got the bell cow. But you need that electric burner. You need that speeder. You need that Jordan Washington to your Adam Muhammad, if you will, when last year when those two guys came in. And you look at Brian Bonner, like, man, 4-star out of Valencia, a true burner, a guy that can really move, got a real runner, but also can still handle, I think the physicality. I think that'll be the interesting kind of transition to the Big Ten. But I do think just looking at his frame, like, I think he'll be able to manage. Now, the question is, what is the usage rate? But the fact that it's very clear, under Scotty Graham and Jed Fish, seem like they're just going to take two running backs every year. So now getting another 4-star to pair, it's looking like a real class building up.
So I was trying to think of the best way to frame it, and I think this is the best way to do it. He's like a souped-up, slightly slower Jordan Washington, because all due respect to Brian Bonner, Jordan Washington might be one of the fastest players on this team. We just had that conversation with our buddy Jake Butt the other day. Go check that out, where he said that Jed Fish told him demand is. That's a conversation for another day. But I look at Brian Bonner, it's 10.5, 10.6, 100-meter dash track speed, I believe. That's just off the top of my head. I could be wrong. But it's something where you talk about handling a college workload. He can absolutely do that. And you pair him with Hansen, who 6'2", 215, looks like he can do that right now. He looks like he can do that on a sophomore and junior film because that's just how much bigger and more physical he is. And that's at the high school level, obviously. But that's just the kind of runner that he is too. And now you pair that with somebody who not only has the home run hitting speed that Brian Bonner does, plus the physicality, where I know he's listed at like 6 foot, 185, 190, something like that. But that's a really nice frame for the position, especially when you watch his film and you watch the way he moves. You see how patient he is, where it's not, Le'Veon Bell, because that's who everybody watches nowadays when you talk about patience, right? But you see that ability to just wait for your blocks to develop. You're patient, you follow, and then you hit the hole, you explode. He's got a great first step, where that's what's different between him and Ansu. Ansu is just going to run through your face, where Brian Bonner has that, that ability to just kind of dance around a little bit when he needs to. He can put his foot in the ground, cut back through the way, and he's gone, which are all really exciting traits to have. And, the more you watch him, the more you'll like him. But let's talk about just what that means in terms of where Washington sits with him right now. Because he's got visits set up with Michigan, Penn State, Notre Dame, I believe, are the other three that he's set to take this spring. He's set to come back on campus on April 25th. And if that's for an official visit, by the way. So I look at all this. On3 has named Washington the favorite in their recruiting prediction machine, which, that changes every day, right? That could be anything. But I feel really good about where they sit with him, with Deshaun Rideau set to commit on April 5th. That looks like it's going to be USC. So it always felt like, Deshaun was just a heavy USC lean anyway. But the fact that Scotty Graham pushed for both of them and said to both guys, hey, I'd really like for both of you to come up. Let's see what happens. In fact, he got them both up on an unofficial for junior day. Great sign. And now things look like they're pretty good right there. But let's flip the conversation around here a little bit, and let's talk about Bott Mulitalo because, like you said, this is a really interesting recruitment.
Yeah, it's again, you can't. If Washington, this all comes down to relationships. So let's be clear at the end of the day. Where Brian, it's similar to Brian Bonner. It's that Scotty Graham connection. It's Michael Switzer. It's everybody that you're looking at. Jason Kapusa really is the key one of this. But you look at it and say, okay, if you like the staff enough and you trust the staff enough in their overall development, whether you're an offensive tackle or a defensive lineman or whatever you want to be listed as or come in as or start out as, we'll figure that out when you get on campus. And it's not in a deceiving way. It's more or less which staff do you trust the most? And, we've seen some guys back off their commitments and end up at other schools, whereas Bott is now, was at Oregon, then kind of decommitted and said, also, I want to try a different position and things like that, being offensive tackle. And so now it's, okay, well, maybe that, like I said, remember what I suggested? That was just a soft parachute to say, well, I kind of like these coaches better, but it's also like maybe I want to, also use this as a springboard. Not saying he doesn't want to play offensive tackle because I don't doubt that. I'm just saying the pairing of the two, you look at Adian Yang, for example, where it's the only other offensive lineman you have committed now. That works both, physically, because you look at him and say the size still checks out. Size-wise, you can still pull it off. But really, you're just talking about stacking the overall talent and where you can develop it up to. And I'm not saying Adian Yang and Bott Mulitalo are the same player. I'm just saying, you have one where you see, okay, there's the future potential, and one where we don't really care where you play. We just see the future potential at the same time.
Right. You said it perfectly, because it's one of those things where, as soon as he decommitted from Washington, from Oregon, the reason we wanted to talk about him was, hey, seems like Washington's the favorite. We did that day, talked about him a few weeks ago. And now it's, it just still seems like it's building there, where I still feel like, obviously he changed himself to an offensive lineman, said he wants to go forward as an offensive tackle. But I think there's going to be a certain point where, maybe even most teams where USC's another school that he's heavily interested in. I feel like, maybe we get to June and he's got official visits set up to both schools and everything like that. And USC will still say, yeah, we're going to entertain this. We'll talk to you. But when you get here, we still want to try you a defensive lineman, because from everything we know, that's how he went through meetings when he was here for junior day, and everything was, hey, yeah, still really interested in you doing this. And especially something we've talked about before and something he's mentioned in several interviews, his uncle is Jason Kafusi, where a family connection there is something that you can't rule out in this case. And because again, I like the way you frame that, where, you talk about, yeah, Washington could be willing to entertain this, because it feels like that's something that Jed Fish and his coaching staff would want to do, is just say, oh yeah, if you want to do that, we'll talk about you like this. Maybe we'll give you an opportunity to do this or do that. And then we get on campus. Maybe it doesn't work out the way that you hope. Hey, that's okay. We like you over here at defensive line, and especially in this Ryan Walters scheme, where he was a top 50 player before he changed his position overall on 247 Sports. He's one of the best players in the country along the defensive line, which is exactly what Washington needs. And in this Ryan Walters scheme, where our buddy Jake Butt, again, talked about it the other day, saying, hey, a big piece of this Ryan Walters defense is getting guys into, especially on the interior of the defensive line, into opportunistic one-on-one matchups. That's somewhere that he would thrive.
And, always reference your favorite player. Like, you have the Vita Vea types. So I'm not saying he's exactly like that, but just go be that interior disruptor. Be that guy at Washington. Washington developed those over the years. Just be the next one. Like, imagine that where it's, hey, we'll entertain you as an offensive lineman, because Caleb McGarry, like I mentioned on that show when he talked about it that first day, where he came in. It's like, think of it here's the way that Jed could sell it, where it's, do like an OTA offseason where it's like, hey, you know what? We'll give you a rookie mini camp. We'll give you 3 or 4 days to show us how you would look at offensive line and offensive tackle in particular. Sure. And then we'll move forward. And if you check that box, cool. We'll give you another one. Hey, come back in June for, whatever, like the unofficial mini camp or whatever, the pre-mini camp, if you want to call it, before you get to August. And then if that checks out, then cool. Yeah, we can keep using offensive linemen for a freshman as a freshman year, and we'll figure out how to develop you there. If it doesn't work out, we'll just go back to D-line. And it won't be a punishment. It'll just be like, hey, maybe you happen to thrive with D-line and turn it into the next Vita. Okay, cool. But you still gave me a shot. And again, it all comes down to the relationships. Like, who do you trust the most? Jason Kavusi and Jed Fish, and clearly all the guys that are in play here from Washington? Or, do you say, okay, you know what, maybe like this school is going to say definitely offensive tackle. They're not even suggesting D-line. Like, they're all in on this. It's like, again, you can pick one or the other, but I think at the end of the day, relationships are going to win out.
Lars, there have been a couple new official visits that have been set, and one of them has a lot to do with a 4-star quarterback, Brady Smigiel. And we'll get to that right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get out on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props with tournament games happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. So, Lars, as we look at this, talk about Brady Smigiel, where Landen Miree, he had an official visit set up for the weekend of May 30th. Now he's going to Auburn that weekend, where I'm sure a lot of people would say, hey, that's really concerning. But he pushed his Washington visit back to the final weekend in June when, oh, hey, somebody who he spent a lot of time with. You and I saw the two of them together during the UW basketball game. It's four-star quarterback Brady Smigiel.
Yeah, so Brady's coming in June 20th, which, 19, 20th, that kind of weekend. He's going to be like leading the charge in that. And one thing Landon told me when he gave me the heads up that he was pushing back his official visit, which he didn't even say he was pushing back. He just said, instead of coming in this weekend, I'm coming in the last weekend. And I'm like, oh, wait, okay. Like that's not necessarily pushing it back, because he didn't even mention the Auburn visit. It was more or less like, I want to come in with the rest of the guys from junior day that I built, as he described it, the heavy hitters. So Brady Smigiel being one of those, obviously. And right this weekend, Brady Smigiel was in South Carolina. Are we worried at all? Have we discussed that at all? Again, no. Because, again, the right thing to do for
about that too.
No, but I will say the right thing for all. So I'll touch on that. The right thing for all these kids to do that we both think are going to end up at Washington in these cases with Landen Miree and Brady Smigiel. Take all the other visits. Go to all the other schools. But the fact that both Brady and now Landon have said, you know what? I want my last visit to be Washington so I can see everything else. I can give all the other schools. I can say I gave them a chance. Then that way I go into the summer with peace of mind. Because if you don't take those visits before Washington, then you're thinking, oh, well, this other school is going to say, hey, like, we can get you in the spring. Like, we'd love to get you in the fall or whatever. Now you don't have that opportunity. You can close that door and say, you know what? I visited South Carolina. I visited Michigan. I visited UNC, wherever, in the case of Landen Miree, where go check out all those schools. Make sure Washington's the last one, because that's again, this is now my opinion, to be clear. This is not what Landon told me. I just want to be clear on that. But the way that I would paint it as, you saw all those schools, so that way I can go to Washington at the end and say, cool, now this is where I knew I wanted to be. I gave all the other schools a chance, but it's just something special here. Jedfish is building a real special program with Brady. And then you have, again, I'm willing to bet good money on, FanDuel doesn't have the odds, obviously, but I'm willing to bet good money that Brady Smigiel is still a commit to Washington by the time he comes in, unless he just holds out for that weekend and then commits on that weekend. But it's all building together is what I'm trying to say.
See, this is why we love doing the show, because that's where I wanted to pick up right there, where it's both these guys have crystal balls to choose Washington from Steve Wiltfong. For people who don't really follow the recruiting world, those don't come out of nowhere. I know I'm not breaking any news or anything by saying that, but those don't come out of nowhere. Those are coming from a specific place, from hearing things, from different things like that. So, like, Lars, it's something you've hinted at a couple times. We've had a couple conversations with our insiders about it, where it's, hey, we've heard that April could be when things really start to pick up with the Cali wave that Kasani Giles told you about, with CJ Lavender telling us everything he did on this show a couple weeks ago, saying, hey, yeah, these are guys I'm really trying to push for, trying to see what happens next. And it all starts with Brady. And Landon and Brady are two guys who, since they've taken that visit, have been somewhat vocal about, hey, yeah, this and that about Washington. And we've seen, and both of them are, just, and I don't want to say an interesting layer here, but something that is really important is their offer lists, where you go in and you look at Landen Miree. It's, hey, this is a 3-star tight end from Ohio, and he's got 35 offers. Look at Brady, one of the best quarterbacks in the country. He's got 33 offers. Like, these are things that are important for not just, Jed, and if they're able to get these guys in the boat and they do end up announcing, let's just say they announce in April. Hypothetically, let's throw that out there. Again, an opinion. But let's say by the time they do come in, they are committed. And we look at something that, you and I talked about a lot on the show last year, was that May 31st visit weekend, where it was populated by heavy hitters, to use that phrase again, where it was, oh, hey, Smith Orogbo is coming in, a bunch of these other guys that are high value 4-star targets from either California or really all over the country. Like Andrew Marsh was on that visit weekend. A whole bunch of other guys were as well that ended up going elsewhere. And now all of a sudden, if you're able to schedule those guys for the end of June, and it's, hey, Brady's coming up that weekend and he's committed. We already know Terrence Sarian and Ansu Sonoe are going to be on that visit weekend and they're committed. Plus, Kasani Giles is supposed to be on that one as well from what he told you. All of a sudden, you're able to get some of those big name guys and have Washington be their last visit. Plus, some of your biggest names are already committed and coming up that weekend as well. Hey, that would be really huge. And that's just something I'm really intrigued to see who else the staff wants to set visits with, where, you can go look through the junior day roster and then look through who's already announced when they're going to be visiting and where. Just something to look at where I think it's interesting because there are a couple, Bott being one of them, a couple of big names that haven't set, dates or at least made them public just yet.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting, kind of in a segue to tie this into the other guy we wanted to talk about, which is Luc Weaver, where he is that guy that's coming up on May 30th, that weekend where you have CJ Wallace and I believe who's the other commit? CJ Levin.
Yang.
And Adiang Yang too. So you have a couple of visitors, but again, it's interesting, and it's almost like it's a catch-22 in a way, because as you were talking about Brady Smigiel and all that, the interesting thing that we can tie this all in together with was when we said that it was probably Jed Fisher's phone that we was I think it was Landon was FaceTiming with when he was talking.
Oh, it was Zach Taylor. Yeah, no, it was.
But no. But what was funny was we could also say that it could have been Jordan Papau's phone. Because you have Brady Smigiel and Landen Miree, you have Joe Burrow, and you have Drew Sample.
So you're right. I want to throw this out there because our buddy Scott Eklund did a great article where he talked to Landon. And one of the things he said was, I walked in the door and Jed was on the phone with Zach Taylor. Funny coincidence how that all works out. I just want to throw that in there because shout out to Scott for doing that.
No, and again, I know obviously it was Jed's phone, but it's still worth noting. It's like that's part of the whole development thing. And
absolutely
similar to where now, how do you kind of factor in Luc Weaver in the situation? Because, the receiver position is really an intriguing one. Again, I know it's a buzzword that we always talk about, but there's so many receivers that Washington is in play for. We talk about Daniel Odom,
Madden Williams.
Not Madden Williams. I said Marvin Williams, the basketball player from back in the day. But no, and then you kind of look at Luc Weaver as like, okay, well, he's another big body, so somebody's got to, you took 5 in the last class. I don't know if you're taking more than 3 in this year. Like, I don't even know what the number is. Like.
So I'm glad you say that because that's where I really want to talk about Luc Weaver because he's somebody who I watched the film a while ago and then I was like, oh, okay, this is pretty interesting. And then I went back and watched it again the other day. I was writing something about him over on Huskies Wire. And I was like, I did not do a good enough job watching this film because man, he's so explosive. He's listed at 6'3", 194. Shout out from my hometown, Sherman Oaks, California. Absolutely love to see that. But I watched this film and I was like, you talk about somebody who can stretch the field and have that, that big body, that Denzel Boston sort of role in the offense where you can find ways to utilize him at all 3 levels of the field. He can run after the catch at his size, break away from defenders. He's got, enough physicality to not go down on first contact like some receivers in high school do, where you got to find ways to make people miss because he can do that too. But the more I watch this film, the more I just say, yeah, this is a dude you need to bring into this class no matter what. Where, we talked about the difference in star rankings, whatever, all that sort of stuff all the time. This is one of those ones where forget the offer list, where it's 15 offers. His other visits are Kansas, Utah, and I want to say Minnesota off the top of my head. But you throw all that out, you throw out everything, and you turn on that film and you say, this is somebody in a class after you take 5 receivers that he's got the physical just makeup where if he gets onto the field right away, great. If not, that's fine because after taking so many receivers and you expect several to get on the field early, if you want to have this guy waiting in the wings for a year, maybe 2, with somebody coming in where we expect to make a bigger impact this year in Justice Williams, all of these sort of, big physical body types that can also run are so intriguing and so much fun to watch in this particular offense. And I think he'd be a really great fit in that light.
No, I don't disagree with anything you're saying. So you nailed all 4 visits. The interesting thing was on his 247 page, it says he's visiting Washington and Kansas on May 30th. So, that is beside the point. But I think all 4 schools are involved in some level, and I'm sure the dates will get worked out. But Washington, worth noting, is not the last visit for him. So, again, as we talked about with Landon, where you do get the last visit, there is the other side of this where you might have to, you can't have everybody come in on that June 20th weekend where it's, hey, we're going to have 35 official visitors this weekend, and I hope that we close on most of you guys. It's like, well, you got to spread them out a little bit here.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's one of those things where it's nice to see some of them coming up at the end of April too, where, just to bring this recruiting thing to a close here, Brian Bonner's coming up that weekend, and you start off with some of your big targets, which is really interesting. And these next couple months will be really interesting for that. But Lars, the transfer portal, it giveth and it taketh away.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
So, Lars, let's start with the bad news here. Dominique Diomande enters the transfer portal. It feels like it was like a year ago at this point in time. We just haven't, been able to jump on here and record in a little while. Shout out to our good buddy Spencer McLaughlin for wanting to do a crossover while he was out of town. So let's start with the bad news there. Comes in early January, sits on the bench for 16 games, doesn't do anything. Now he's going to BYU.
Yeah, I mean, man, it's like what a time to be alive, really. But in a way where we were talking about this towards the end of the season, and it was, what do you play him? Do you get him in a couple of games to burn his red shirt or do it, do whatever? And it's like, well, what's the point in that? It's if he's clearly not ready to play or Sprinkle, and again, now you kind of wonder, well, did Sprinkle have an inkling as maybe he's not sticking around, so I'm not going to play him because of that? He's just being nice. But no, I'm not saying that was the case. I'm just saying, I still think Danny made the right decision not to play him because, I don't think he would have made that much of it. It was not to say he's not going to be a good talent, but it is really interesting where it's, man, you come here, don't do anything, come here mid-season after, I think, what didn't he commit in June or July?
Yeah, it was like late June, something like that.
Like that early report, but then it was like, well, hey, he's not going to be here. And then he was training in Dallas at one point. And then, anyway, I don't know. It's all interesting stuff. I wondered, and Nico Harrison played a role in that. Anyway, besides the point, where you just look at it, and I think in a way it's almost like, okay, well, if it wasn't going to work out here, might as well leave now and don't just kind of hang around and then do nothing for another year. And it's unfortunate, but it is this day and age in college basketball where, you just look around the entire country where you guys got leaving Sweet 16 teams. You got the college football transfer portal is weird, crazy. This seems to be on a whole nother level.
Oh, it absolutely is. And that's one of the interesting things where he goes to BYU, he'll team up with AJ Dabansa and everything that's going to be going on over there, where I'm curious what that team is going to look like. I'm going to be keeping a close eye on them where, shout out to FanDuel and sleepers. I think BYU might be a sleeper to make Sweet 16 Elite 8 again next season. So we'll get to that at some point down the line. But I'm curious about what this team is going to look like now, because Tyler Harris and Makai Mason are now the two outstanding guys who haven't signed to come back after Danny Sprinkle announced that with Zoom Dial and Frank Kepnong. So we look at all this, and I think we should just go from let's go from big to small, because the most recent news that we've heard is, or at least as we record this at 3:00 on Sunday, is Nick Davidson named Washington to his top 5. And Lars, we've heard so much about what this rumored NIL budget might be. Doesn't matter. We're not getting the weeds. We're not getting the numbers, anything like that, because who knows what they really are. But I look at this Nick Davidson thing and I say, you want to go get a big physical guy to play next to Frank Kepnong? That would be such a perfect addition.
And also to bring along Nico Mondalo. I think then you look at the size and profile, it's kind of the same mold of what you're looking for. And you can also see where what Danny had to work with last season and what he's trying to build together this season is a little bit different. And you can see that exactly with Nick Davidson. And I think I forgot BJ. I think it was BJ Rains who covers Boise State in Idaho. He pointed out, he's like, what is Nico Mondalo worth to a Power 4 school? Is he worth the biggest contract in terms of for NIL for a player, even though he's not going to be the best player on your team? And it's like, well, I don't think that's a problem when you're talking about P4 schools, because you're trying to stack a decent roster together. You're not just focused on one guy, where some people use the Great Oxford comparison. And I think they're two different situations, where Gray was just kind of in a camp of his own, been with Danny at two different stops. This one is like, hey, can we actually get the right system fit and get the right, again, a lot of that has to do with Frank Kepnong. You mentioned where as long as Frank is healthy, they've shown some interest in a few other centers in the portal as well. But you just look, if Frank can stay healthy, that is ideally what Danny's looking for, that 6'9", 6'10 forward to play the 4 and have the ability to shoot the 3, rebound, kind of do a little bit of everything, and also to keep being on defense as well.
No, absolutely. So, I was kind of struggling which guy to go to next because you talk about other big men. I think we should start with Landen Miree, where really interesting. He comes in on a visit over the weekend where that's the big physical center that you really need, that you kind of hoped Casey Ibekwe would be last season and just kind of never really amounted to it, where Danny told us multiple times over the course of the season that, yeah, I'm not really comfortable with him guarding these teams that like to spread the floor and bigs that can shoot. That's not the case with Nick Davidson, obviously, where that's why he's such a highly touted recruit. But I don't necessarily know if that would be the case with Somerville either, because he's 6'10", 275. But that's somebody that, hey, it doesn't matter. We need a big physical presence in the paint. Yeah, that's certainly somebody who has proven that he can also withstand a season in the Big Ten, because he just did that at Rutgers. So just a name to keep an eye on there, since he's the only one who's been confirmed to actually show up on an official visit after Brock Harding went to ECU. But the other guy that I really want to talk about in terms of big men is Magoon Gwath from San Diego State, because my word, man, I love watching that kid play.
That's one where I think you just whatever you need at this point. And obviously I'm not saying it's all about the Benjamins, but at the same point, you just look and say, you can't replicate certain players, and that's one of them. He's one of them, where you look and say, whether it's offensively, defensively, you just have that front court presence to just obliterate all, and you pair him with other guys that are on the bench, and so you're still working to develop a bench. Because you can't, I think we saw this season, you can't just bet on one guy. But if there was anybody to go all in on with all the chips, to San Diego State guy.
No, absolutely. The more I watch him, it's certainly a little bit more on the defensive end, where he's a lot further along there. I think he averaged 2.6 blocks per game this season, which is just absolutely unbelievable. So I just look at it where you make a really good point there. And it also, a lot of last season, as you and I talked about before the year, hinged on Frank Kepnang being healthy. Obviously that wasn't the case. And then you saw it when he came back, he came off the bench for a little while. I don't know if that would necessarily be the case this season, depending on what the roster looks like, right? But if that's something where you're able to bring in, let's say they get all three of those guys. Doesn't seem like that's what's going to happen, but let's say they do, where all of a sudden you can live in a world where, coming off the bench at your 4 and 5 is Frank Kepnang and Landen Miree, and all of a sudden that big physical front court that you were looking for, hey, you've got that. Plus you have Nico Bundalo, and you have a deep rotation of bigs, which Danny told us multiple times last season, you just don't have. Now, there's a whole lot to get to in the backcourt as well, where you and I have talked about Kennard Davis a little bit. Has been rumored to be, favored to come to Washington. We're going to spend a lot of time on a very interesting player. I need to pull up his stats again. Quimari Peterson, Lars, that's something that On3 had to report first, that Washington is in his top 4. And you talk about exactly what this team needs. Average 3.7 assists, 19 points per game. Yeah, 19 and a half points per game. Got it right here. And I'm just leading up to a 42.2% shooter from 3-point range this season, where you talk about just filling a need perfectly, a ball handling guard that can score at will, plus is a sharpshooter. That's just exactly what this team needs.
Just absolutely lit with that shooting percentage from deep. You look at that 42%, that's money. And I think we saw that especially down the stretch, but just having a consistent 3-point shooter where Makai and I forgot who the other one was.
Tyler Harris.
No, DJ Butler. DJ Davis. Sorry, not DJ Butler. DJ Davis from Butler, who was one guy where you could go off for 25, but then you could also disappear for 5 games. Where Peterson clearly has shown that consistency over a couple of seasons now, and especially this past season. So if you can have that consistency again, now the question is you have to have that consistency while leveling up to the Big Ten. I'm not saying that he can't do it, but just that's always something to consider, where when Danny's looking at recruiting some of these guys and putting this roster together for next season, you have to still keep that in mind. And that's why it's so imperative to have a Sue, a Tyler Harris, and Makai Mason coming back, so you don't just break in a whole new set of guards, and then if they can't figure it out, it's like, oh, we got nothing coming in and nothing, to going out in that sense.
No, absolutely. And that's where, I think that Danny deserves the benefit of the doubt after his first season, where, if he's able to get the roster that he wants in place and then struggles again, I'm sure there are some conversations among fans like, hey, I'm concerned about this, I'm concerned about that. But as of right now, I think he deserves an opportunity to build the roster that he wants because, like we said right off the top, we know the resources are in place to do that. So now it's a matter of closing on a Nick Davidson, on a Quimari Peterson, and making sure you're able to just get what you want because he showed with his freshman class that he can go out and get the guys he wants and the guys that he believes that he needs. Getting Matty Traore, the number 2 junior college player in the country. Getting Nico Bondalo, a top 40 player. JJ Mandequit, a top 50 player. Cortland Muldrew, who is the all-time scoring leader in Arkansas now. Like, he went out and he got good players. Now it's time to supplement that through the transfer portal. I think he might end up taking more than 6 guys, which was the plan that he talked about on KJR a week or 2 ago. But I think throughout the next, let's just call it 3 weeks, he deserves a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. When the transfer portal closes and, some of these guys have signed, or a lot of these guys have signed, let's put it that way, I think it's going to be a little bit more fair to look back and say, did you do enough?
Oh, I agree. And I also think he's going to do enough. I'll just tell you that right now. I think he's going to come out of this and you're going to look at the roster and compare it to what he was going into last season and say, this is more like a Danny Sprinkle roster. This is what he was actually looking for. Last year was more or less what he was working with. And so now we get to truly get a litmus test on what Danny can do, especially with bringing on the sophomores like Zoom and the guys that are going to be developing under him.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click the little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.